Good afternoon to all of you. The place is not new to me today because I had an interaction with students and the research scholars yesterday. So many of the faces are known, at least I stand on a familiar territory today. Thank you. The presentation that is there, it revolves around the theme of this students organized seminar on identity and citizenship. And as a linguist, particularly as a social linguist, I've brought in the notion of the identity with reference to linguistic citizenship. I must confess here that most of my presentation will be based on what I have been doing as part of my field work, field study. And this has largely been in the state of Jharkhand, where I have been working with the minority languages, the languages like Kuduk, Khariya, Mundari, and also as part of one of my recent projects that I have with the Ministry of HRD under Scheme for the Protection and Preservation of Endangered Languages, that has also given me space to work on Birhor, which is an endangered language largely spoken in Jharkhand, but the spillover is there in other neighboring states also, but very small, insignificant number that may be seen in case of Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, and Bengal. So my concentration has largely been in Jharkhand. In addition to that, I'll also be taking up some aspects of the work, again as part of my engagement with the Endangered Language Program. And I'll use the data from what I have been working on Chinali language. Again, an endangered language, which is not even listed in the census anywhere. And that is the language which is spoken in Himachal. And I'm working on that language, so I'll be taking most of the data in support of my argument, illustration. This is what I'll do. The linguistic citizenship makes language the medium for enacting and performing citizenship. It is premised on the awareness and belief that the very legitimate state-sanctioned and institutionalized forms of political discourse may exclude the feelings and complaints of marginalized groups and may constrain alternative rhetorical means which a group may choose to express its voice. It understands the role and importance of language practices and representations in a democratic participation for everyone, and thus critiques the legitimacy of validation of language practices of the mainstream speakers only in terms of the formal public sphere and systematic construct of language. Central to the linguistic citizenship is an understanding of the variety of semiotic means through which the marginalized non-mainstream speakers can express their agency, voice, and participation in an everyday practice of language. How they can be used, how their language can be used to wrestle control from political institutions of the state for giving new meaning and repurposing to reflect the social and political issues that affect them. From the vantage point of linguistic citizenship, approaching linguistic practices entails rethinking the relationships of power underlying particular practices, such as who may be included, who may decide what a language is, whose language should be given a legitimacy. I bring a photograph here, and I request this first photograph that is there, if you click, this is the one. This is the recent photograph that I have got from, I did not take it personally. Let me briefly share with you. Because of my involvement with the Chinali speakers, something that may sound repetitive to some of you because I did talk about it yesterday. When I have been working with the Chinali speakers, my initial commitment, which was mandatory on my part as a project, is to document the language, document within what is the required framework for the documentation. And this I have been doing. But when I was interacting with the Chinali speakers, the speakers who have completely forgotten what their heritage language is for them. Many of them, since they don't speak Chinali, they have adopted Hindi. And they are in a very privileged position in the state, occupying different positions in the hierarchy, and they are very comfortable with that. I was able to interact only with those people, senior citizens, who have been located in a few villages in those areas, and I have been talking to those people in addition to what the mandate required from me. And in the process, I was trying to elicit certain things regarding what can really be said about the identity. Definitely not in anticipation of that I will be asked to come and talk about identity here in IIT. It was just my own interest. And when I was doing that, some of those people, they asked me very straight question, what do you want to do with us? Why do you want to work on our language? How am I going to gain with your engagement with our language? Can you do something for us? My concern is, and this is what I'm reporting to you, they told me that my concern is that I want my language to become more visible. It's not visible at all. None from my community speaks this language anymore. And they're very comfortable with that. Can you do something about making it more visible? How do you make us get engaged in this kind of a participation where my voice can be heard where it is supposed to be heard? Now this was a difficult position for me, and I was not able to really answer, or I'm not able to give my commitment to what they wanted or what they expected of me to do. And I came back with a reflective moment with me that I must do something as part of my commitment to the people with whom I've been working. Because I know that as a field researcher, not only that the ethics demands that I should be following the norms of ethics, but the research also demands that I should be part of the advocacy, and I should also be part of some element of empowerment that is required in the research. And that was in the back of my mind when I came back home with no commitment given to them straight away. But this was there in the back of my mind, And when the winter vacation came for us, I called them up. One of the persons of that community, a very senior teacher of a school, he's a government officer because it's a government school. And he's a very respected person of the community. I called him up and I said that, is it possible for you to visit Aligarh? You be my guest and stay with me for a week or as much as you wish to. And we would like to talk about what I can do with regard to your language. His concern that time was that can I do something for a script, developing a script for Chinali, because it's an oral language. And that was a very difficult thing for a linguist to straight away say yes or no, because a script is not something which is a neutral medium for any one of us. It has a strong ideological, political potent that it carries. It has a social import. And I was conscious of this fact that if at all I delve into doing something or committing myself to doing something for developing a script for them, I may land up in a problem. Because my familiarity was there when this kind of a venture was carried out by the institute, which is a government institute called Central Institute of Indian Languages at Mysore. And this was with regard to the Northeast languages. And they were doing it well, and suddenly the problem that emerged there was the problem of picking up the script. Do you want to do it for the Nagari script, that is the Devanagari script? Would you like to do it for the Roman script? If at all you want to do it for Devanagari script, why should I follow your Devanagari script? I would like to have it in a Roman script. So the entire exercise of doing something for this development of a script really did not really proceed further, and they had to stop the idea of doing something. That was there. I was aware of that. So when this person came to Aligarh, I asked him that, what do you want me to do with regard to your script? And that is the point where my engagement for almost 6-7 days with him, because that was a holiday period for me, and I had full time dedicated to his services. And then I realized that his concern is that the oral heritage language, which is Chinali, it is a language which is not spoken by anyone, except that in a occasion where it is supposed to be used, family domains, social functions, they are using it because it's a heritage language. But the problem is that the impact of Hindi is so strong on them, and Hindi is not able to capture those nuances of the sound of that Chinali language which mark the identity of Chinali speakers. And let me tell you that Chinali language is one language which has a strong affinity with Sanskrit in terms of grammar, in terms of morphology, and also in terms of use of certain sounds, which are the sounds which are typical Sanskrit sounds not used in Hindi even. Although the kind of a nationalist narrative that we have around us, it forces us to believe that it is Hindi which is a true representative of Sanskrit, which is again far from that reality. Of course, one has to take up this narrative because that narrative is a source of sustenance for certain dispensations. Now, this was the idea that I got from him, that the script is required for them because by virtue of those specific sounds, they invariably land up creating miscommunication and even at times misrecognition in the Bourdieuian sense. This was very true. Of course, they did not articulate it so well, but this is what I elicited from my interaction with them. And I also know that what is significant for me to intervene here is that the script that they're talking about, which has the sounds that they are talking about, which are specific to the Chinali language, those sounds are the sounds which are indexical to the identity formation of those people. And we need to capture those sounds because they provide a social meaning to them. They are the indexical signs for the creation of the social meaning of existence and of recognition. I gave him a whole set of tasks because he said that these are lean period for him because that is an area which is full of snow, closed. So he has got a lot of time at his disposal. And I gave him a lot of things to carry it out during this period. And as such a dedicated person that he is, committed to the cause of taking up the interests of his community, he went there and has started sending me all that I wanted him to do. Because my concern with him was that I must have a strong positive signal given to me that the community desires that the script should be there, and also the community desires that the script can be carried out in a Nagari script. There is no dispute over it. And if that is the assurance that I get from you, my involvement will be very easy because I can bring I have the background where I can bring myself into doing something for them. And this was a photograph along with this, a number of things that have come. I'll just display it for you. This was a photograph which is sent to me. What is not really, if I could see the rear glass that is there, in red it says Chinal. Can you see that? It says Chinal. Now, my first interaction with this community, it was very discomfituring moment for me because they said that you people call my language Chinali and you people have named it as Chinal, we as Chinal. You know what the Chinal means? I said, I heard about it, but I did not do it. It was the British gazetteer which has given the name to you. This labeling is by them, not by us. Chinal means uncivilized vulture, uncivilized people, and you call us that. I said, forgive me for that. I cannot take this thing because it's not my omission, but definitely I appreciate what you're saying. And they said that we refuse to call ourselves as Chinal. And we would not like to have our language called as Chinali. Now that is a backdrop. And a couple of, I think not even 2 weeks back, this photograph comes to me. And very clearly they say Chinal, which is printed on the rear window of this vehicle. This is something that really makes me think that it's a beginning of the participation of the group in the citizenship. Because when we are talking about linguistic citizenship, what this photograph says, I'm not going to the way he stands there or the way he's doing all those things, but certainly they indicate a sense of pride. It certainly indicates that there is a sense of assertion. This sense of assertion and pride is in the semiotic process. I'm not doing the entire semiotic analysis of it, but it is there in the semiotic process of citizenship. And in this, It is neither instituting the person in a subject position, nor it is giving a status of citizenship. Rather, it is bringing the conception of an act, and I emphasize the term act. It is giving the conception of an act of citizenship. It is informing us that from the perspective of linguistic citizenship, Chinal, as a referential language, does provide a basic building block for a political act. It is not giving a status. It is giving you an act. Linguistic citizenship reframes, and I quote here a scholar who African language situation, and we also share this kind of a post-colonial background. According to Strout, and I quote him here, is that linguistic citizenship reframes semiotic process practices of citizenship away from a totalizing sense of language, and therefore it is better attuned to the implications of multitude of identities, subject positions, and positions of interest. Quote closed. From a post-liberal paradigm of linguistic citizenship, linguistically marginalized groups in general stand to gain because it increases the visibility of minorities. This issue of enhanced visibilization of minorities has traditionally been ignored in abstract liberal citizenship. Hence, the avowed aim of linguistic citizenship is to delineate and make visible the socio-linguistic complexity of language issues for the participation of the minority speakers in governance, which remain missing rights discourse. In linguistic human rights paradigm, neither the role of language issues in governance is adequately addressed, nor the socio-economic fabric of language is correctly conceptualized to explore relationship between language, state, and civil society. Of linguistic citizenship not only cognizes the relationship but also highlights the importance of language as a source that links civil rights to political rights in the pursuit of participatory citizenship. With its emphasis on the concept of language as a resource, linguistic citizenship emerges as an alternative that makes allowances for social and participatory rights alongside legal and political rights. It also brings the sense of community boundaries, which is essential for an enduring and unique groupness. And here, I would bring what Jashne Rekhta, I do not know whether you're familiar with that. It's very much on the TV. A movement carried forward by an IT graduate from Kharagpur, Samir Bhatia, who has recently been given the Lifetime Achievement Award by the university, our university, where he is carrying out this movement because he represents a family. He is a businessman. He is an entrepreneur. Runs a multinational company. But he inherited Urdu language from his father. And his passion for Urdu has been so strong that he told us when he was given this award, he narrated his personal account, and he said that when I was trying to understand what exactly the Urdu ghazal tells me, What came in between was the linguistic barrier. I was not able to appreciate it. And that gave me, that triggered off in my life the commitment to do something for propagating Urdu. May not be in case of Perso-Arabic script, but at least in Devanagari script with the diacritic markers representing those sounds which are the shibboleth of Urdu identity. The P's and Q's of Urdu sounds which are necessary for making Urdu as claiming himself to the speaker of Urdu. And with that idea, he started a movement called Jasht-e-Rekhta, where he invites all the stalwarts, be it Javed Akhtar or anyone, you name those who are a public figure all over, and he asks them to participate in a discussion, talk to people, and bring this kind of a discourse in a domain which is a formal domain where the interest is there with regard to the culture of Urdu. Now, this Jasht-e-Rekhta for me is what comes about because of this sense of community boundedness. Or even, I remember, for the first time when the Chhattisgarh state, the government, declared that there will be a holiday, state holiday, for celebrating Chhat. I'm not so sure whether among audience are people familiar with the festival Chhat, because it's a typical festival celebrated in Bihar. It's a festival which is celebrated by people who speak Bhojpuri language, mostly, but even other speakers as well. But it's a festival confined to the territory of Bihar. It has not come out of that. But because of the migration, people who have gone to different states, and the boundedness has become so strong, forced the government to declare Chhat as a state holiday. And even a Bhojpuri film is one of the industries in Bihar which competes with Bollywood in terms of the kind of money that it generates, because in that much of money compared to a Bhojpuri film in Bihar and in other parts where people who are there in Bengal, other places, settled there, they would prefer to go to a Bhojpuri film than to a Bollywood film. And this is a part of a study that was carried out by one of my students with regard to the language of migrants in Bengal. Now, I come to the second part of my, that was a preamble that I made. Now I've come to the basic part of my thing called vanished identity. And I'm bringing out, unravel the facets of vanished identity. We did talk about linguistic citizenship. And when we talked about linguistic citizenship, we took recourse to bring Chinali there. Now that is the point of departure for me. I want just to raise this question to myself, and of course I want to share with you all, that is Chinali represented in census? Does census have a space given to Chinali identity? It does not. In fact, as an identity, representation in the legitimate state-sanctioned political institution, which is a census, of course, which promises itself to be a vehicle for the linguistic categorization and fostering of identities, and it creates an ideal space at the same time for the metamorphosis of identity that has come about, giving the facets of either being a submerged identity or a re-emerged identity, or hiding your identity or a vanished identity. I think I may not be wrong in saying if you look up the second edition of Anderson's Imagined Community, the second edition of Imagined Community has a section devoted on censuses, maps, and by the necessity to have census included there in his work. It was not there in the first edition. For the purpose of arriving at some kind of a clarity, in order to understand what we mean by submerged, re-emerged, and even hiding identity, let us theorize it. We need to theorize because it is theorization that gets us close to the logic of reduction, which the census carries very craftily. By using the parameters of mutual intelligibility and linguistic relatedness, language relatedness that they call it. After recording the number of mother tongue names returned by the respondents from all over the country, they are linguistically scrutinized, and this is what I have taken from the first page of the 2011 census that has come out almost 5 months back. Such a long delay. They are linguistically scrutinized, edited, and then rationalized. In 2011 census, 19569 raw returns were subject to scrutiny, which resulted in reporting 1369 rationalized mother tongues and 1475 unclassified or other mother tongues. This is not my category. This is the category given by the census. Thus, 16726 raw returns were left behind. Out of the 1369 rationalized mother tongues, 2011 census arrived at 121 classified mother tongues returned by 10,000 or more speakers. That is the necessity for the census to bring the information in the public domain. Anything below 10,000, the census will not bring it. Now, what is the basic objective for arriving at this particular number, 121, and not recognizing the rest of them, even when their speakers are much more than 10,000? This is a strange thing. What happens to the remaining 1158 rationalized mother tongues whose speakers are not below 10,000? And what happens to 1474 unclassified other mother tongues of less than 10,000 speakers? The official statistics gets its legitimacy from technologies of truth production. That is what census is, which census carries out, and the state uses it as an ideological state apparatus to pigeonhole the people within their boundaries into categories: linguistic, racial, and ethnic, for conferring group recognition and numerical proportion. If the driving force for rationalization is mutual intelligence, which is consequently creating submerged identity, then how does one explain the inclusion of 49 varieties of Hindi in 2001 census and 56 varieties of Hindi in 2011 census? The number that has gone up from 49 to 56. In fact, many of them, such as those speaking Shekhawati or Dhundhari in Rajasthan, Haryanvi in Haryana, Chambyali in Uttaranchal, Korthia or Khota in Bihar, Laria in Chhattisgarh, have problems speaking Hindi even though they are assumed to be Hindi speakers. Further, if the rationalization has been on the basis of mutual intelligibility and linguistic relatedness, Hindi is more close to Hindi. And Bagri, Rajasthani, Haryanvi, or Chhattisgarhi should not have been brought under the label Hindi. Besides being an identity marker, language is also a fluctuating marker, which is unlike religion. This characteristic of language often leads to conflict, particularly when the linguistic group with the submerged identity decides to use its numerical strength, weight in the political space. An exit of Bhojpuri and Maithili in the 2011 census speaks about this conflictual position that has allowed them not to let these languages subsumed under Hindi. Census, as the ultimate register of the truth, also creates consciously hidden identity through the and the ideological dispensation of the enumerators. The widespread perception of linguistic minority languages are more a liability than a resource compels them to become a willing accomplice in adopting language of the state, which they believe would work in their interest. They feel comfortable with the usage of dominant language and continue to cling to the language of the state, more on account of inferiority complex that they suffer. And this, I'm drawing my experience from Jharkhand, where it was not my experience, but experience of another colleague of mine, that a Kuruk mother was found beating up her child for a simple reason that the child was speaking in Hindi. And the mother said that you should not speak in Hindi, you should not speak in, the child was speaking in Kuruk. And the mother was beating up the child because mother was insisting that the child should speak in Hindi. And when the mother was asked about it, she gave a very terse answer that Hindi bol sakte hain and you get a better job. You want my child to be left behind by speaking Kuruk? This is the anxiety of the mother. And this is not an anxiety of one mother. This complex represents the entire tribal anxiety that was there in case of Jharkhand that we visited. It is not an isolated case that reflects linguistic inferiority of the marginalized language groups. This is there that runs high among the tribals of India. And I found this in case of Munda and Khariya also, where the speakers had absolutely no qualms in not using their language and using Hindi, because even in the informal domain of home, and we found that 90% of Mundas of Ranchi have declared Sadani or Sadari as their mother tongue, and 500% of Mundas have declared Mundari, that is their traditional language, as the mother tongue. These claimed mother tongues are foster mother tongues and not the native language in which speakers interact with each other at home, within the community. This is a non-conflictual aspect of adoption, where the marginalized linguistic groups feels that claiming their mother tongues did not politically matter and are thus willing to hide their identity. Multilingualism in India and our political gurus, the linguistic gurus, have always taken pride in claiming that what makes Indian multilingualism different from others is that India, bilingualism, multilingualism is a norm. In non-Indian setting, particularly in the West, the norm is a monolingualism. This was the slogan that was given by our linguistic gurus when we were growing up and we were part of the linguistics discipline. This was true. But what is very unfortunate today, and here that again I have brought in 2011 census to tell you that the entire slogan of India being a multilingual country, the entire slogan at a juncture where one can contest it. And we have a data. Because if the census is supposed to carry the truth, we have to accept it because we do not have any alternative media through which the truth can be countered or can be disputed. And I have that data with me. If you could, I'll just cursorily show that 2011 census, which tells you about how Hindi is there and what is this, the prevalence of bilingualism and trilingualism with regard to Hindi. And I've taken 6 languages, the 6 scheduled languages of India, to show the trilingualism, bilingualism and trilingualism, that incidence in case of these languages. Well, the data is there. I would not like to, I'll just move further. And to tell you another very starking thing is that the same data, the same information that has come from 2011 census, this is the information that tells us that the scheduled languages that we are talking about, there are 22 scheduled languages in India right now, and there is a significant rise of scheduled languages and a significant drop of non-scheduled languages. I'm not talking about the languages which have speakers less than 10,000. I'm talking about speakers which have far greater number than 10,000. And they are listed as a non-scheduled languages by the Constitution. And today, the data shows that according to 2001 census report, 96.56% of Indians speak 22 scheduled languages, whereas the remaining 3.44% speak all other languages. But in 2011 census, we find 96.71% speakers speaking the scheduled languages and just 3.29% speaking the non-scheduled languages. Forget about those which have speakers less than 10,000. Now, this is not just in India. This kind of a catastrophic figure is also there all over the world. And I'm just giving you a data from the Summer Institute of Linguistics survey that was carried out in 1999, which published that this publication revealed that a staggering 90% of the languages that are spoken by a meager 4% of the population and a meager 4% of the languages that are spoken by a staggering 96% of the population. This is the situation there in case of Australia. The details go like this: 51 languages with one speaker, each, and 28 of them were in Australia. About 500 languages had less than 100 speakers, 1,500 languages less than 1,000 speakers, 3,000 languages less than 10,000 speakers, and 5,000 languages less than 100,000 speakers. Linguistic human rights. This is the second aspect of my presentation. The linguistic situation is, of course, inextricably complex. We understand that. And like any other post-colonial context, language in Indian subcontinent also has been a site of struggle since the introduction of English education down till the creation of the linguistic states, on the basis of language. Because language, the control over language, is not just the language, language is a convenient tool for the empires, but the control of language is also a part of the governmentality. The concept of linguistic culture, which is there, very strong thing, which is missing in our so-called language policy, and unfortunately, we do not have a clear policy. It's mostly a posture of a policy. Now, the notion of the problems that we have is that since we do not have a clear policy of language, most of the things have been given for the language human rights activists or language human rights alone to take up the matter, because they are expected to have a wider participation in general for the societal benefits and interaction. The notion of language rights within the linguistic human rights discourse endorses an ethno-linguistic stereotyping in the form of monolingual and uniform identities. It also forces groups of speakers to work actively to differentiate themselves from others. And it does this by claiming unique linkages of language and identity so that maximum political leverage can be accrued in the competition for scarce resources. This facilitated in bringing a situation where the community finds itself actively engaged in participating and contesting domination and making investment in the development of distinct orthography, its own grammar and social and school glossary. And let me tell you my experience about, again, a Kuruk speaker. When we have visited, that visit of mine was basically a part of the project that the NCERT wanted to have, where I was also involved, and we wanted to see under Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan what kind of a benefit is being given to the people, because the state has been asked to publish books in all the recognized languages of the state, and they were published. When they heard about that some people are coming, the books which were which were dumped in the storehouses, gathering dust, they were suddenly unearthed and brought out, because we were to visit. And our visit was mostly a visit which was unannounced, so we landed up in a place, a village which was a Kuruk-dominated village, and the school that was there in that village was a Kuruk. Children from the Kuruk family, Kuruk background, were mostly educated, getting education. What surprised us really at that time was that the school teacher who was appointed by the government was a school teacher who did not know Kuruk. She was a Hindi teacher. She had absolutely no familiarity with Kuruk, and she was expected to teach Kuruk. And you can understand what kind of a teaching that was going on. In the evening, we decided to enter the village, go to the village and talk to the community. And we were quite shocked to see that there was a girl whom we met, did not meet her, but we saw. We saw there in the school, that girl was sitting under the lamppost, one single lamppost in the entire village. The entire area was dark. One lamppost, and the girl was sitting there and writing something. That fascinated us. And we went to that girl and asked her, "What are you doing?" And with the initial inhibition, when she was coaxed by her parents and other elder members of the community, she showed us that. And what she showed us was something that really moved us. Because she was writing in Tolong Sikhi. That's the script of Kuruk, Tolong Sikhi. She was writing in Tolong Sikhi, her own language, because that was the only space that was given to her to use that language for having her own identity. She had no opportunity to use that Tolong Siki script that is for the Koduk in the school, which is meant for the Koduk speakers. And that is something that brought me close to what Warren says, that there is a centrifugal, hidden, and playful activity that comes about even if there is a domination. The community also finds a space to articulate itself. Now, this linguistic human rights approach thus lends itself to strategies of enhancing the role and importance of minority languages that are structured willy-nilly around the same received notions of language that have led to their oppression and or suppression. But it failed to address the problem that prevents an equitable social, economic, and political participation for linguistic minorities. This has largely been because it restricted itself to legal and political rights and worked within the liberal understanding of citizenship, which does not effectively knit language into general principles of good governance and citizenship. Another aspect of inadequacy of linguistic human right has been that it rests upon a notion of group collectivism, and this itself makes it arbitrary and essentialist. In linguistic human right paradigm, neither the complexities of society, economy, and politics are properly conceptualized, nor any attempt is made to explore how provisions of linguistic rights are entangled in a web of unequal power relationship. Even linguistics of standardization, carried out within the linguistic human rights paradigm, not only reconstructs minority languages in the image of official standard languages so as to embody the social ideologies, class differences, and standard, non-standard distinctions common to prestigious languages, but also levels multi-layered and complex blended identities of minority speakers almost to a political insignificance. Furthermore, since the complexities of society, economy, and politics that constitutes the fabric of language are not theorized in linguistic human rights discourses, one hardly finds any mention of language as a construct formed through the process of political power, nor of the ways in which technologies of language description themselves impose specific political definitions of linguistic realities. Consequently, this leaves very little space for disadvantaged groups either to make themselves visible or to contest the status quo. Even if they express opposition to hegemonic decisions, its success is contingent upon the disposition of the few significant and powerful individuals or groups who may accede to their demands, provided they find it in their interest, and then they'll accommodate it. Since linguistic human right paradigm does not look language as resource, it has not been able to lend material resource for minority language use and has failed to facilitate the participation of minority language speakers for the realization of social rights. Linguistic human rights discourses draw sustenance from the provisions enshrined in the Constitution to underline the use of one's language, but has glossed over addressing two important considerations which have a bearing on the efficacy of the linguistic human rights. And these are, the first one is the largely held belief that conflates rights and claims, and secondly, the widespread perception, mostly among the linguistically marginalized speakers, that their languages are more a liability than a resource. The perception cannot be stopped merely by acknowledging and recognizing the linguistic diversity and importance of multilingualism, or even granting the official recognition to languages. In this paradigm, neither the complexities of society, economy, and politics are properly conceptualized, nor any attempt is made to explore how provisions of linguistic rights are entangled in the web of unequal power relationship. Regarding conflation of rights and claims, it must be emphasized that claims are not the same as rights. And this has virtually never been addressed in linguistic human rights discourses. In fact, linguistic human rights paradigms, in this paradigm, the most common argument regarding linguistic rights is premised on the notion of ethics and morality. Linguistic human rights discourses fail to appreciate that moral considerations alone and even proclamations of various linguistic human rights issued by constitution and international bodies essentially provide moral and rhetorical support. They are, according to Spolsky, formulations of, and I quote here, utopian policies without responsibility to reinforce them. Quote closed. These are merely statements of support on paper and do not imply obligations to implement them and face their practical consequences. All these relevant acts, charters, articles have no legal binding, unlike rights of rights to life and freedom. These are neither codified in law nor they show judicial remedies for sins of omission. And now I enter the last part of the presentation. This is basically the post-liberal paradigm and linguistic citizenship. Post-liberal paradigm gives immense importance to viewing language as a resource and allows linguistic citizenship to look at language in a more general sense as a symbolic, material, and intimate resource that can be used in the service of participatory governance. In language, as a symbolic resource, the choice to represent its people, its speech community, rests with individuals. They are the agent for participating in structures of power and resistance for doing something that may have political and social implications. Its emphasis on actorhood makes it imperative for the members of linguistic minorities to politicize their own knowledge and representations of language and language use, to recapture a voice in the political discourse on language and questions of equity, linguistic, social, and political, to articulate what languages are for them and what they mean to them, to advance matters of language as relevant to and determinate of a range of social issues. And this is very interesting thing that just I got this thing from a newspaper, that because of the individual participation and the recent announcement by the government that they'll have 10% reservation, the Pahari speakers have been granted 3% reservation if they speak Pahari. This is an outcome of the involvement of the speakers in the exercise of linguistic citizenship. Of course, there are problems that come in the way, most significant being determining the boundaries of a variety, which is infused with political significance and theorization of language and politics, which is often unavailable to those communities who are theorized. In many cases, such theory fails to provide any clear basis for political action, which is reflected from the way members of marginalized linguistic community continue to become a willing accomplice in the disuse of their native language. The problem also comes from the discipline itself, and I'm talking about my discipline, linguistics, which has insulated itself from socially significant engagement which is relevant to linguistic citizenship. At this point, it is important to reflect upon the objective of doing applied linguistics. How much does applied linguistics relate to the pluralization of authority? This is an important issue that needs to be addressed in order to avoid the recontextualization of speakers' multilingual realities into master narratives of linguistic authority. According to Roberts, applied linguists need to pay close attention to how speakers themselves conceive of their languages, and as a master of course, build their own descriptions around these, thereby, and I quote Robert here, integrating investigation of fundamental linguistic processes with dialogues, with community and the professions. Quote closed. In language as a material resource, language's role in a political economic site of a struggle is highlighted for representing the informal economies in developing contexts. It takes the notion of linguistic citizenship as a way of addressing more explicitly the linkage between economic and material redistribution and political participation. And here, the scheme for the protection and preservation of endangered languages is performing its role in a more constructive way. And we have also come across a number of things that are coming out in the name of publications which are being used, which have its own material relevance for the community as such. These are small, of course, very small significant steps taken in terms of maximizing existing linguistic repertoires as well as neutralizing ethno-linguistic conflict. And language as an intimate resource embodies respect for diversity and differences and recognition of multiple and shifting identities. Code switching, code mixing, and multilinguality or trans-languaging provide important information about complex and shifting identities and the multiplicity of elegances that the communities assemble around perceived and constructed common varieties. Just as reflection upon the objective of doing applied linguistics is important in respect to the pluralization of authority, resource-based approach in terms of intimacy also demands positioning reflectively and critically in respect to broadening of the standard. Standardization is one of the area of linguistic investigation which can take on board the task of critically evaluating the dynamic interrelationship between language and politics, the ideologically loaded encounter between the subaltern usage and standard language makes process of selection and rejection appear innocuous. The same process gets replicated in case of marginalized languages for inclusion and exclusion in the garb of authenticity, thus mirroring this image of dominant language. Dissimulating hegemony is the hallmark of a standard language discourses, which has not only reduced the oral form to a symbol of backwardness, but also created a hostile and demeaning attitude towards the spoken language. In the name of codification, the manifold details of interaction in everyday life of an individual are lost. These minute details of linguistic and culture differences which form the linguistic heritage of heterogeneous subject, positions of individuals and plural social groups. If the broadening of the standard is to be aimed at, then different and competing narratives of variations of language and culture have to be authenticated by experts by crafting novel resources and new social meanings into legitimate and authoritative repertoires. Language as an intimate resource does not allow downplay and distortion of the socio-symbolic and political importance of linguistic differences, and thus facilitates inclusion of forms of speech that were previously excluded as being substandard and impure. They are as much cultural capital as written varieties of language are, and thus offer social and cultural strategies for analyzing and engaging with conversion of capital in various cultural fields. Linguistic citizenship, therefore, has an implication for standardization, for broadening of the standard, would extend the possibilities for participation, and would also transform the standardization process into a site of a struggle. It is a broader and more inclusive notion than linguistic human rights. It refers to the role of language in power, access, and equity in a democratic framework of participatory citizenship, and it understands the role and importance of language practices and representations in democratic participation for all, and thus critiques the legitimacy of validation of language practices of the majority dominant languages of society. And representations play important role in promoting equitable, intimate, democratic, and materially supported forms of participation within and across national boundaries. It works towards attending how representations and concepts of language of speakers could provide a basic building block for a politics of language. Thank you.
How we can save or preserve the linguistic minority in sense of other also like emerging new community like LGBTQ. They also a problem of share their identity in public space because they fear they have some patriarchal and political hegemony on that. I fear they express in their public space they are violated through some means. So here also they not shared with in some region in public space. In sense of linguistic minority, they cannot share their cultural identity and cultural identity and practice of it in public because they have not scripted. So you told me in academia they have taken some discourse of their linguistic minority. So this is a means of the expression of the material things. So how do we preserve without the script, without the share means to in public sphere?
In fact, you are articulating the anxiety of those speakers. That is what they are saying. They want that their language, the heritage language of theirs, should be preserved. Not a preservation as a museum artifact, but should be a part of the living speakers, should be a part of a living language. And for that they say that if we do not have a script, we will have a problem because we are losing it. So this is the same anxiety that you are talking about, and that is the reason why they are willing. See, why I am bringing this aspect of linguistic citizenship, because in fact linguistic citizenship grew also out of the concerns shared by the discourses of sexuality, the discourses of ethnicity. It shares those concerns, and the nub of the matter, the basic crux that is there, is participation. You have to be given a space to participate. So far, the participation is not being given, they're not being allowed to participate. And whatever they have as a kind of a participation, that must have a validation, a legitimacy that should come from the top. If they do not have that legitimacy granted by them, they have no permission, no authority to go into that participation. This is the reason why when I see that the Pahari speakers are given a chance to represent themselves, a 3% grant given to them. See, not everything that comes from the devil is devilish. There are certain things that also come as part of the virtue, and it is upon us to grab it. This is the time that if this space is given coming from the top, that okay, participate. People went forward because they have been struggling, they have been confronting with this kind of a problem, that how do we have this? Pahari is not listed. Pahari is listed subsumed under Hindi. Even 2011 census says Pahari as one of the varieties of Hindi out of the 51 varieties listed by them. And Pahari is one of them. So today at least Pahari speaker has been given this kind of a material comfort. And the linguistic citizenship tells you that you have a resource which is not just a resource which is intimate, but a resource which is material also. That Pahari becomes a cultural capital for them to encash their citizenship rights. And that is what I think that if we broaden ourselves, going beyond the discourse of linguistic human rights, which is a very powerful discourse, because any discourse in the that comes from the top, be it a human rights discourse, when it comes, we also goes lock, stock and barrel to grab it. And similarly, we have grabbed this discourse of linguistic human rights, but we have not theorized it. It has not been theorized because it has not really understood the intricate relationship that exists between the society, between the economy, between the politics, and the larger arena of participation.
About linguistics working in isolation, kind of, as in not engaging with disciplines or not actually making use of language as a resource, as a meaning-making method. So, but doesn't language documentation anyway build a positive attitude of the community towards their own, as you said in the case of Chennai? So, isn't that enough? I mean, how much should linguistics venture beyond the scope of linguistics? Because language documentation itself is a very necessary thing that is not being done anyway, which should be.
And I think Rajesh will be the best person to answer that, because Rajesh represents that discipline of linguistics, which is the most insulated discipline from my point of view. I'm basically a social linguist, and Rajesh is a theoretical linguist. That's the difference. And when I'm talking about Rajesh as a theoretical linguist, what I mean is that the theoretical linguistics insulates itself from the demands of the society. But that is a necessity. I'm not dismissing it. That's important. Because if Chomsky has a visibility all over the world, it is on account of his basic theorization of language and bringing it close to a cognitive science. That is the importance of Chomsky. So I'm not undermining it. But at the same time, I also believe that there is a performance part of the language. And that performance part needs to be taken up, because language is also embedded in the society. It is part of the society, and you cannot devoid it from your engagement. Now, coming to the second part, yes, I did talk about that also. I mean, for me, it was an optimism that a SPELL project, the SPELL project is a Government of India's initiative. And under the SPELL project, what they have done, it's a very meticulous work. I don't want to indulge into this kind of self-glorification, but the committee that was formed, I was one of the members of the committee formed by the Government of India as a 10-person committee, where we were asked, the task was given to identify endangered languages, which was a very difficult task, because the Home Ministry does not tell us any information about any language which is less than 10,000. Because I do not know why the Home Ministry always believes that language, and it is here, that language is part of the home. It is part of the Home Ministry. It is a security problem. So they do not give any information. As a result, we really had a struggle. With that kind of a struggle, we were able to identify 540 endangered languages existing in India. 540. This is not a sufficient, I mean, this is not a small number, but this is not a representative number also. They are much more than that. But we had no data. It was basically on the basis of information provided by the UNESCO, information provided by the Ethnologue, we were able to do that. So coming to your second part of the question, yes, SPELL, which does the initial task of a SPELL is documentation. That itself is something which is very gratifying. I personally, like you, I also personally feel that it is a very good thing for the language to be documented. That's true, but it should not stop there. The documentation is one aspect of a language. What is equally important is the revitalization of the language. Because if you do not revitalize the language, then who will speak it? How will the language sustain? And the script, as you pointed out, the script is a source for the revitalization. That is something that gives sustenance to it. I didn't hear you. Okay.
From University of Calcutta. You have just mentioned about scripts and its liberty. I am referring to a work by novelist James Quincy. His novel Waiting for the Barbarians. This story tells out a certain allegorical empire that reinforces its identity by othering the barbarians. While othering these barbarians, they reluct to read the script of the barbarians. And at one point of the novel, the narrative implies that those who have no written history has no history at all. My question is that what should be the response to the notion of reluctance to recognize other scripts in order to reclaim the historical narratives of identity?
Reluctance to recognize the recognition of other script. I don't see any reason why there should be a reluctance to recognize, because the only reluctance will come from the dominating group, because they would not like to recognize them, which is obvious, and they have got reasons to believe so, because script is a source of empowerment, and they would not like to have this empowerment given to the people. Because if at all they do not have a script, they do not have an identity. In the long run, they're losing it. So it's in their interest. But other than them, I don't see any reason why others should have a reluctance. And coming to what you talked about, Coetzee, of course, that imagination is possible because it's Coetzee. Because you can talk about this imagination where you had a barbarian's language being used, and the barbarian's language has a script. Because if you look up the record of how the languages are being, the way the census of India carried out its first exercise way back in 1881, when they did the exercise, it was very shocking to find that the way the names were given to the languages spoken in India. For example, Urdu was called as the language of Malich, the language of the downtrodden. Now, this is, they can do anything because they're in a position to do anything. The othering is always possible for them, and that is a source of sustenance for them. So this is possible. But reluctance will not come from the community which wants to have it. Reluctance will come only when there is a strife situation. A strife because one community may say that why Devanagari, why not Roman? And it's a very interesting case of Santhali. You know, when the movement started of Santhal, the creation of, when it was carved out in, I think 1992, when finally Jharkhand state emerged as an independent state, carved out from 4 different states, getting the boundaries from them, the territories from them. Santhali is one language. In Bihar, it was written with Devanagari. In Bengal, in Bengali script. In Odisha, Odia script. And in Chhattisgarh, Nagari. And in Jharkhand also, Roman script. So it's got 4 different scripts. But within the people of Santhal, it has got no problem at all. So for them, there is no reluctance. The reluctance comes only from other than them.